Welcome to Amintro Family, the podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Sammut. We hope you're enjoying the free online platform and community for family caregivers, be it through the Amintro Family app or amintrofamily.com, because it's all about helping those caring for their aging parents, relatives, or friends, and to connect and share experiences and access valuable resources. Our guest today is a co-founder of MoneyWise Institute, a seasoned financial services expert, consultant, and author of Sage Advice, Choosing the Best Financial Advisor for You, and his newest book, Roots of Prosperity, Building Legacies Beyond Wealth. Gary Teelucksingh joining us. Gary, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thank you so much for sharing this with your audience.
Thank you. Absolutely. And Gary, your new book, Roots of Prosperity, delves into the challenges and opportunities of intergenerational wealth transfer. How much has your personal experience, Gary, of building wealth in a new country contributed to what you know about creating legacies?
A multifaceted answer, but I think we're blessed to be in Canada. We're blessed to be Canadians. We're blessed, many of us, to be children of immigrants. Be it recent or distant. There are a lot of values that come to this country through the families that come here, and there's a lot of commonality in those values. And so what I realized growing up is the commonality of a lot of the strong family values that existed, but many of the conversations that people have as they become young adults and adults are all about money and not about values. And so a lot of doing this book was to connect the notion of family values to the notion of family planning and family financial planning, but to do that in a way that humanizes it, because there are a lot of cultural taboos about money. And my book covers many of the different cultures through stories, but there are a lot of cultural taboos.
Yeah, because and you talk about it in the book, how differing cultural attitudes really play a part in wealth transfer. Like that can be a big detail. I know in my family that was a big detail. My parents came from another country and started a new life here, and there were some, I wouldn't call them barriers, but there were some differing thoughts, and of course you look back at a generation. There's generational attitudes as well towards the right way to build wealth. It's maybe not quite the same now.
Absolutely. And, many of us would have been told, save, save, save. And then we have our parents or grandparents look at us in a slightly disapproving way if we spend in ways that they don't necessarily think is appropriate. And there's a balancing of values, because they may have come at a time when nothing was available. They had nothing. Maybe they gave us the benefit of having a couple of rungs up the ladder. And so they want us to have a better outcome, but they want us to accumulate wealth in the way they did, which was, more thrifty. And maybe that's not the best outcome for all families. Like, there's a lot of unpacking, Jeff, some of what you just talked about among families and multi-generational family members.
Well, my father, as far as investing is concerned, was very safe because he came from poverty. So he hung on to what he had and he didn't want to risk it at all. And that's what he knew. So he went with what he knew, and that's what he tried to pass along to me. And maybe it was because he came from poverty. Maybe that's why he was so freely able to offer advice, or at least have conversations about finances. And that's not always the case. Now, with your book, it includes checklists and planning templates, which are so helpful, but conversation prompts. Let's talk about that, because according to a recent MoneyWise Institute survey of over 1,500 Canadians, 52% of parents have not talked to their children about inheritance and legacy. Is your book meant to be a conversation starter amongst family members as much as anything else?
It's a perfect segue. Yes, I think the book aids in many ways. One of my dear colleagues, who's also in the book, is the CEO of a very well-known national financial planning organization, and he believes that while the industry, while financial planners, while banks, while everyone in this field has spent their time talking about money transfer, the wealth transfer, they haven't spent time talking about the family planning, right? That goes with this. So when you talk about, half half of Canadians haven't. So it actually goes 80, 80% of Canadians would expect to leave money to their kids, but more, essentially half of the people haven't had the conversation. Both the receivers, 80% expect that, they don't know anything about their wealth or inheritance, right? Parents haven't spoken about it because it's a bit taboo. And no one really knows how to start the conversation. Is it me asking dad or mom? Is it them talking to us? Is it a dinner table conversation? Should it be one on one? Is it a bit of a group? Should we talk about, like, there are no conversation starters. Overlay that with, well, my parents didn't teach me how to do this, and so nobody's teaching me how to do it, right? Like, at some point we all create traditions. You teach your children something, they hopefully pass that along. Conversation starters aren't one of those things. So I'm hoping, and I've had some really, really lovely feedback, but I'm hoping that this helps families start conversations. The other thing I'd say, Jeff, is this, just, I'll pass it back to you, is your conversation and mine, the way it started, is exactly how 95% of the conversations start, which is the moment people get into this subject, and your audience will appreciate this, they immediately make it personal. I did not make this personal for you. You made this personal for you, right? This subject is personal for all of us. So the book's real purpose, right, is to take what is already personal, right, and give us maybe some tips, maybe some conversation starters, something that will help us ignite that within our own families.
Well, and I love how you got personal in the book. Like, I laughed out loud. I think the hardest, you wouldn't necessarily think you're, you're putting your head in your hands already. You wouldn't think that, you pick up this book, Roots of Prosperity, Building Legacies Beyond Wealth. I've got my copy right here. You wouldn't think I didn't think picking this up and hanging on to it and reading it that I would necessarily laugh out loud. And I did. When you talked about your story of going to your dad and saying, gee, you're thinking like, oh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to bring this up? And you go to your dad and you're like, okay, I gotta know what he wants to do
Oh,
with
yeah.
all of his money. So you go, you go to him and you say, kind of somewhat sheepishly, you go and you say, so dad, what do you want to do with your wealth? What do you want to do
Right.
with what you leave behind? And he just says, well, go ahead and do whatever you want. I trust you, Gary. Go ahead and do whatever you want. And then your response is, well, Dad, I'm just going to give it all away to charity then. I'm going to give everything away. And whoa, he just stopped and looked at you. And that's the point where I laughed out loud, because I can imagine what your dad's expression would have looked like. And you described it in the book.
It was a moment. So these are the conversations. We had a plan, and the plan was to interview my parents, right? For the book, interviewed my parents for my own legacy, right? To do the things that we say people should do, which is really truly find out what your parents want in words, not in written form or in the form of, a will, because yeah, it's written down, but there's so much lack of intent, right? So when I asked, but I knew my parents, right? They're going to be like, oh, whatever you want to do is fine. So that doesn't actually answer, right, the most important question. And we have to deal with, right, the realities of the cultural norms of our parents. So and by the way, I'm a huge believer in philanthropy and charity and giving back to the community. But I realized that if I said that to my dad as a stark statement, then it would pull out of him what he knew he wanted, but he couldn't answer or wouldn't answer when I asked him. So he said, tell me what you want. He goes, I don't know, whatever you want. I trust you. You'll do the right thing. Okay, that doesn't help me honor my parents. It doesn't help me, right, create and have reverence for their legacy. But when you say, well, I'm going to, basically give it all away, it immediately triggers this thing in their brain like, no, for 40, 50, 60 years, we saved pennies, which became nickels and dimes and quarters. And then we put it over here and we did, oh no. And it, Jeff, it really, it was cathartic. So I'm glad you laughed out loud, but I'll tell you, right, your parents, my parents, your audience's parents, they will react very similarly, because then he says, I want it to go to my grandchildren. I want this, I want that. My mom chimes in. It's, wow, like you couldn't answer the question. Well, they could answer the question, but they didn't have the artfulness, right, to articulate it until they were, I would almost say, provoked, right? Almost provoked, because they go into that, oh no, right? Our nest egg is going where?
Yeah.
And they tell you what they want. So I, that little nugget.
Your dad was great, and you pushed the right button, but your dad was great. He gave it sounded like a quite a calculated and thoughtful response. He said, "Charity is important, absolutely, but we built all of this for you. We built this
Right.
to pass it along and make sure that our family is taken care of. So that is first priority." So it was a wonderful conversation starter, and I just I loved it. I loved it, and you really pushed the button. It was great. And you talk about your parents and geez, we saved so much, and we nickels and dimes, we stowed them away. This was something we worked so hard on, and we did it for you with you in mind. Is wealth transfer as much an emotional process as a financial one?
I would argue it's maybe even more emotional, because you, you know, when you've made a decision, right, to have money and have that money have longevity, right? So there's money that we need to live on. There's money that we may choose to, have discretionary spend, right? Go on a vacation, do these things. There's money we decide to save for, be it retirement or possibly for, inheritance. And we know we're not going to spend that money. We know we're not going to touch that money. We know that it's intended for other purposes, be it charity or our heirs. So if we know that in our brains, right? That bucket of money, whether it's a small bucket or a big bucket, it could be my home, right? That might be all the asset I have, but I'm living in my home, so I'm not spending it. The moment you kind of know that that money is not within your consumption pattern in the future, you seem to almost think of it differently. It's almost, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but as a person, I would say I personally, and many people I talk to, feel different about it. Right? It's kind of almost not my money. It is my money, but it's money intended or earmarked for the future. And so that, Jeff, to me, is more emotional than it is, I would say financial or detail oriented. I need to pay the bills. I need to feed myself. I need to have a roof over my head in some form, right? I need to maybe indulge in a few things that I've maybe worked hard for and reward myself or enjoy. And then there's other stuff, right? And I think the other stuff, right? The other money, if there is, that becomes more emotional. And I think that's where you can have a will. And the will is usually, please, by the way, to your audience, please have a will. Please have powers of attorney, right? Please be clear about who your executor is going to be. Please talk to your executor and let them know the responsibilities. It's a lot of work. So please do those basic hygiene things. But if you've done that, anybody reading your will, they're going to say, okay, who's the beneficiary? Okay, beneficiary one, beneficiary two. Okay, we'll divide everything up. Here we go. Well, that doesn't actually tell them, the receivers, what you want to do with it, what you want them to do with it, right? Maybe they have a mortgage still. Would you like them to pay it off? Maybe there's a family cottage, right? You really want the cottage to stay in the family, but now your estate's being divided. Does that mean they sell it and split the money? Or should they really talk about your legacy of maybe, as a family raising them and spending time there, and maybe you keep that for future generations?
Mm.
These
O-
things are emotional.
Okay, so I want to ask about a wealth psychologist, and that's a licensed mental health professional who specializes in helping individuals navigate the unique psychological and emotional and relational challenges of wealth. Now, for givers, there's an emotional attachment, as you talked about, to the wealth that they have built. For the recipients, there can be this sudden responsibility of managing that wealth. When might a wealth psychologist be necessary for either party?
I think I think there is a time when you, the giver, knows that you're going to leave something. I mean, we all realize that unpredictable things happen, but in the normal course, right, you reach a point where you know, right, I'm of a certain age, I am of a certain net worth, be it a lot or a little, it doesn't matter. It matters that, I have something to leave. The moment that you get there and know I can live out my life comfortably, right, and still probably have something to leave. So, one, you need to get to that place. I think the other part is the receiver, depending on how your family dynamics are, needs to be in a place where they actually know they potentially have something to receive, right? Because we talked earlier about the stats, right? People don't even expect an inheritance and or don't know anything about it, or expect an inheritance and don't know anything about it. There's a lot of confusion. So the first thing I would say, Jeff, is, are you connecting the dots? I know that I probably have something to leave. Probably, not guaranteed. I then know, as the receiver, I've talked to my children or the beneficiaries and said, I might have something to leave you, right? Both parties need to understand this, because it's the situation of both parties that the psychologist is going to help with, right? Because the eventual action of that happening is sometime in the future, right? Or, let's say that the receiver is getting that help after their parent or whatever has passed. That's a bit too late, right? It's a bit too late, because not because they can't help you, it's because they're not, clairvoyant. They can't see, right, into the past or into the psyche of those that aren't there anymore. So how do you know you're doing the right thing? A lot of this comes with guilt, right? Responsibility comes with the guilt if you feel like you're not respecting your parents' wishes. Maybe we don't all feel that way, but a lot of people kind of subconsciously do. So I would argue, practically speaking, that the most benefit could come from having that conversation at a time when you, the giver, has realized you're going to give something, in all probability. You've told the receiver that they're possibly going to receive something. And then maybe either party expresses some degree of stress around that. I don't know how I should give it. So, can I give you examples on both sides?
Please.
Sure. So, as the giver, here's an example. It's actually on both sides. What is fair? The definition of fair. Because in a will, mathematically, fair would be, right? If there are two beneficiaries, you divide equally. That's two, right? You take 100 units of something and you go 50-50, that's fair. But actually, is it fair? Fair has a multiplicity of layers. For example, and I'm making this up for illustration, but let's say the parents, we'll call it the parents and the children, okay? The parents helped one of the siblings a few years ago with a down payment, because maybe they needed it, maybe they weren't as well off as the other sibling, maybe their career, whatever. For some reason, they felt, we should help, child one. Okay, but we never needed to help child two. Child two's cool, whatever, financially more sturdy, whatever, doesn't need the help. This is a value choice, right? Okay, so now when you go to divide things, is that equal fair? Or is there some form of, well, you got a down payment, I should kind of also get a down payment, mom, dad passed, right? Was that fair? Like, there is a lot of fair built into that the notion of fair, not actual fair, the notion of fair, as the receiver, right? Put that on the receiver now. You're going to have a lot of potential sibling tension, because why did they help you, right? And now I should get another, X because you got it. And they're like, no, but dad said this, and you're in a different, like the same situation of dividing 100 units into 50 and 50 does not constitute fair. Fair comes when the parents and the children have a conversation, and they actually say, child one, we gave child one this, child two, you understand, right, that our goal is to help you, both of you be lifted, and they needed more lifting than you. And so we're doing this. By the way, we're doing this. And now they understand what fair is in the giver's mind.
I've known givers in the past. They had two kids, and if they felt like, let's say, I don't know, one kid needed to buy a car, needed help with that. Let's say they needed
Right.
$10,000. I'm just picking a round number.
Right.
But they always thought was, okay, we need to give this person 10,000. We need to give our kid $10,000. Well, it's going to cost 20,000 because at the same time, we're going to give 10,000 to the other kid. It's going to be fair. So every time we're handing out money, we're doing twice as much, and we're giving the equal amount to the other person to do what they wish with it. So they always felt like years from now, we'll always look back and say, I gave you this much for your wedding, and I gave you this much for your renovation or whatever it is, this much for your car. But at the same time, we gave you both an equal amount. Now that's that's very generous, and two, that's coming from givers that had that money to give.
Jeff, that's a great example. So now I'm going to push back. I'm going to push on the same situation. Okay, that's super, right? They help 10 grand, 10 grand. You get the car, you get 10 grand. You didn't need the car, but you get 10 grand. Awesome. Okay, now both of those kids, adults now, have children. Okay, one has two, one has one. Grandparent says, happily going to pay for their tuition. Two kids, one kid. Explain fair to me,
Right.
please.
That's an odd number now.
Sorry, we can't predict children. It's an odd number. Explain fair to me, please.
Well, I guess the kid that doesn't have any siblings is going to get twice the education.
But you see, we're laughing about it
I know.
because there isn't an answer. The
Yeah.
answer is a conversation. Because if you had those two adult children who now have university age children, and you make this commitment to an honorable commitment, believe in education, want to help them, in whatever they need, great, we'll pay the tuition. You still need to have the conversation, because child two, who has one kid, might say, well, hold on, you're giving, 20 grand over here times two. We should get 40 grand over here. Or I'm going to send my kid to a private school that costs more. Can you, you need to, these are values. The money is secondary, right? Right. The values have to be aligned. And in some ways they're not equally aligned, because the giver has the right to say what they think is fair. Now they should have the courage. I mean, you shouldn't be like a giant gap, but they should have the courage to say, well, we think this is fair. Well, if you do this in an open way, if you do this in a safe way, hopefully your children have enough respect to have the conversation with you, and don't run off into the corner and have a snit. Like, have the conversation. Dad, I don't think that's fair. But mom and dad should be able to say, well, hold on, right? Like, we think it's fair because. Now, you may not agree, but that's some of the learning. It's like, well, you know what? It's their money. They earned it, right? It's their legacy. Why am I making them feel bad about it? I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying there's learning in the conversation, right? There's learning in the conversation. There's a lot of hardship and a lot of heartache and a lot of tension that can happen just on the word fair, right?
Mm.
just because it's
Well,
fair.
I'll tell you something my father-in-law says. He says that it's better to be handing out with a warm hand than a cold one. I love that line. I think he made that up. Yeah. He says it's
Doesn't
better
matter.
to
It's
be
worth repeating.
yeah, it's better to be handing out with a warm hand than a cold one. So, let's say you have a giver that is in their 80s, let's say. I'm just making up these numbers in this scenario.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's say you have a giver that's, healthy for the most part and in their 80s. They just entered into their 80s, let's say. Well, how long are they really going to be around? And they might be looking at their legacy and their wealth, and let's say they're sitting on $2 million. I'm just making up a number. Let's say they're
Sure.
sitting on $2 million. Do they then look at it and say, okay, how long am I going to be around? Let's say, in a great scenario, I'm around for 20 years. Do I need that much money? Or can I slowly over this time give away, let's say, half of it just to make up a round number so I could watch my kids and my grandkids enjoy it?
It's a, an amazing scenario, right? And it's the real one for many, many families now because, right? I mean, you hear many stats. They'll talk about $1 trillion of wealth transfer between now and, I don't know, 2030, right? There's CEO that's in the book, right? He says that he thinks it's multiplicity, like multiples of that. So well more than a trillion, maybe two or three. So now let's go back to your example of 2 million. And so again, the psychology, right? That person has said, I'm probably not going to need the 2 million for the remainder of my lifespan, albeit for some horrible shock, but for the most part, not going to need it. Okay. What do I do with it? Well, there's a number of factors. One, you could, so first of all, if they kept it, keep it, keep it, keep it, invest it, keep it. And then through your will and through the whatever you've decided, it goes. You even in that scenario, you have to answer the question, what horizon am I investing over? Right? So now let's be morbid for a moment. I actually might only live 5 years. Okay, but should I invest my money with a 5 year or 3 year or 2 year horizon or keep it in cash? No, because the money's horizon is much longer than your lifespan. So, because remember, in your mind, that money is living on to the next generation. And hopefully you've had the conversation about it not being frittered away on, unnecessary things, but rather carried through. So the money horizon at this point is longer than the individual who has the possession of the money. It's longer than their horizon. So that's just one thing to keep in the back of your mind because you know even if and maybe you're having health issues and you think, well, I might not make it more than a couple of years. A same thing. Your advisor would be asking you like, what do you want to do with this? You say, well, keep it in cash. Well, not necessarily. You should invest over the horizon that's appropriate for the money. Now let's go back to your example. Should I give some of that money? Well, values based, I would say sure. I mean, you know that you're going to have excess. You know that you're going to leave a legacy or an inheritance. Why wouldn't you want the joy of that benefit conferring at least partially to the people you intended to? Why wouldn't you? That's one. Two, many would argue that our children potentially are experiencing more hardship maybe than just because of the world the way it is. That's one argument. The other argument is we experience hardship and we'd like them to have less. Either way, it speaks to why not help. If they were going to get X dollars in 10 years, why can't they have a third of X now? That would materially change their situation. It might say, oh, we can retire sooner. Oh, that removes my retirement burden. Oh, that helps us pay for our children's education. Things that materially reduce stress, that increase the family's level of, prosperity, not money prosperity, overall prosperity. I think that's an amazing, amazing thing. I think that's an amazing thing. The right proportion, right? I think that comes to each giver and receiver's comfort level. There is a side to this, though, that over generosity can be problematic. And there are unfortunate stories where people have given all of their assets away, signed them over, but then they run into an issue.
Right. You got to make sure you
Now
cover
the
that off if you're a giver. You got to make sure you've
net, yeah,
done the due diligence to know how much you're going to need.
because you don't want to be on the other end potentially, in a health depleted situation or maybe a mentally depleted situation, depending on what, and then you don't have control over your care because you don't have any money left, and maybe people are going to fight over that care. Well, you should have, and you should, like, there's a lot of dynamics. So maybe the answer is not all but some, and the sum is discretionary, but a third, a half,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Less about how much you need to give away and more about, well, what will it do to the receivers, right? Oh, they still have a mortgage. Oh my goodness, wouldn't that change the stress on my son or daughter's life if their mortgage was gone? Oh, what, like think about the benefit. What you're really saying to your audience is, if you gave some of the money now, why are you doing it? Well, presumably you're doing it for your own self to get the living benefit of the joy, right? That you're conferring to your children and see, or children, grandchildren, whoever, seeing and living and experiencing that benefit, that goodwill, the warm hand.
Well, there are, yeah, the warm hand. There are more people though now, nowadays, millennials, Gen Zs, that are, at least they think that they're depending on what they are going to inherit, because according to a recent MoneyWise Institute survey, again of over 1,500 Canadians, a quarter of millennials and Gen Zs say, quote, if I don't get inheritance, it will affect financial plans. And I think that says a lot about the current financial landscape, given job instability, tariffs, what have you.
So the MoneyWise Institute cares deeply about financial literacy and helping Canadians sort of elevate themselves, both in terms of their literacy around financial matters and also around understanding the reality of the situation they're in. I think in this particular case, it's sad, right? And but here's why it's sad. Sometimes it's sad because I, the receiver, realize I will never reach, or in any meaningful way, right, the kind of financial stability that I either deserve or feel I deserve. Like there's a gap. I'll never get to buy a house, or I'll never have my retirement funded the way I want. Like there's a gap. So then what often happens is you go, well, oh, you peek over the fence. You go, well, oh, at some point, some of that, whatever that is, going to come to me. And it calms you a little bit, but it also creates this. There are a lot of psychological aspects. Again, I'm not a psychologist, but I would say this: you do not want to create a dependency for yourself on something you can't control. That's one. Two, you don't necessarily want to create an expectation, right? That then damages the family when it's potentially not fulfilled. So I think it's sad that people believe that if they don't get an inheritance, it'll impact their financial future. But if they didn't have any inheritance at all, that is their financial future. You should have the realism of what your financial future is. If you believe that you would like to materially improve that in a way that you're not able, like there's going to be a gap, why not have the conversation? It's the opposite of what we just talked about. Maybe those parents are thinking, I don't need these funds long term, some of it will come to you, why wait 15 years? I can help you now. It's the conversation, Jeff.
So is this conversation more of so the whole family is talking now. We've got
Yep.
the givers that contain one or two people, and the receivers that, let's say it's two people or more, one, two people or more. um
Yep.
so is the collective approach to view an inheritance, a legacy, more as a family business? What are we going to do with this? What makes the most sense financially or otherwise. Is that kind of the collective approach? Let's look at this as a family business.
I mean, I talk a little bit about that in the book, that a business mindset is probably good discipline in
Mm,
general, right? Just
yeah.
in general,
Yeah.
right? It causes you to think about the relationship between income and expenses. It causes you to think about like assets and what I do with an asset in the business or an asset in my life, right? Those decisions, and then you think about the tax implications, which can spread across like family members. So there's facets of this, but I think the precursor to so the mindset, and I don't mean this in the absolute literal, you had to have a business degree to get it or run a business to get it. The business mindset, there's an air of minimum discipline, right? Minimum discipline, minimum good hygiene. We should all have that. I call it a business mindset. The precursor to that, though, is how do you get on the same page? Because you just said, right, there's a room now, right? This virtual room, and it's got, maybe a couple of givers and a handful of receivers. Uh, they're not on the same page, right? They don't same view. Maybe they have completely different backgrounds, right? Maybe they don't have the same, day-to-day values. Maybe mom and dad have values, those haven't transitioned or transferred, or they've rejected them. So, there's a softer way, right, that I would start when no seeds have been sown, right? Or you're not sure the seeds that have been sown have germinated. You're not sure, right? I would have softer conversations, like directional, right? Ask people for input, get them to share their thoughts, whether you agree or disagree. Like, just get them out there. Nothing definitive, just get them out there. Just have some conversation starters where people can, no one's wrong when they share their opinion. It's just an opinion. And someone can disagree with you. That's okay. Nothing definitive is happening. We're sharing opinions. So the givers might say, we're thinking about this, or a friend of ours, right, did this. Like, what do we think about that? Just what do we think? Like, as in, my, this person talked to me about, giving a quarter of their inheritance right early. I'm just curious, or like, what do you guys think about that, or how do we feel about that? Because like, I don't know if I can't give you the exact wording, but like a conversation that's softer to get values out. One child might say, like, I can tell you, I said to my parents, they're like, we want to put everything in your name, and I said, no, no, absolutely not. Well, we want you to take care of it. Happy to do that, but no. Now, why? My reasons, right? Deeply personal in our family, were different. My parents have a sense of pride of having accomplished something. Okay? If I take that away virtually by putting that in our family or receivers' names, technically my parents don't have anything. That changes their sense of self-worth. They don't even know that. I refuse to do it. Now that's me. So come back to the table. Have the conversations, because one child might push back and say, like, no, mom, dad, like, no, right? We're all good. We are all good. We don't need it, right? Let's, make sure that everything's good for you, and we'll help you take care of it, and we'll deal with that when it comes. Okay. The other one might say, oh my God, I need that money. Yes, let's do it. Get the conversation out. Don't make any decisions. Get the conversation out. Hear people's perspectives.
There might be a number of people involved in these conversations, though, within the family that really don't know what they're talking about. And I'm not trying to be insulting.
Ah,
I might be one of them. So, and a lot of what you do focuses on helping financial institutions improve financial literacy. And maybe you can speak to whether or not the financial industry is failing in educating their clients. But when does a financial advisor come into play here in these conversations?
so I'm a strong proponent of advice. Okay. I'm a strong proponent of advice. You should get it from a professional. in the right way, right? Pick your favorite channel or your bank, financial planner, whoever is appropriate. Number one, trusted. Number two, properly credentialed, right? Trusted and properly credentialed. Your neighbor isn't properly credentialed, right? Your brother-in-law is not properly credentialed. Trusted, yes. Credentialed, no. So do not make decisions, right, unless you've at least vetted them with someone who's trusted and credentialed, okay? Partly being credentialed means they have a license, they're regulated, and they have an obligation to act, right, with, fiduciary care. So, when you go back, and look through this and say, how do I get this advice? I think, that's the lens, that I would use, right? Look for that in the family, look for that advice. But have financial institutions failed? Well, I think that's an unfair label. I would put it this way: there's a gap, and no one stepped up to fill it. So, if I were advising financial institutions, which I also do, I would say, are you crazy? You need to fill this gap, because what's actually happening here is first generational wealth transfer is happening without people having the right help to do what we're talking about here, right? Have conversations that's rooted in values, to make sure that the transfer is smooth, to make sure the conversations are happening, right? I think you have a great phrase, to make sure that things are being handled with a warm hand. And the institutions who say, we want to manage your money, we want to, keep your relationship, the advisor who says the same thing, there's an ROI. Most people measure that return on investment in the short term. Well, I want to help you proportionally to the amount of money you have with me, or I want to help you proportionally to the amount of money that you could bring to me, right? Because it's an economic ROI. Because people have to spend their time servicing clients and they need to get paid for it. Otherwise, they don't make a living. The ROI is wrong. It's wrong. Because when people were accumulating wealth, you go find those clients who were working, doing well, you get them as clients, you help them grow their money. What we're talking about now is many, many retired people who have wealth, who want to transfer it. Who's your client? The receiver or the giver? Because the receiver doesn't have the money yet. So they actually don't meet a lot of criteria for many high net worth advisors, or advisors, be it in a bank or an independent financial planning firm. But if you look at the family unit, of course that's your client, right? The family unit is your client. So there is
Yeah, givers and receivers.
but the problem, if you measure it in the short term, is I might invest time in these conversations, which are soft, they're time sensitive, they require empathy and trust, and there might not be a single dollar change hands, right? Not a single dollar change hands in the near term. Maybe the child, the receiver is my client. I'm helping them have a conversation with their parents. Parents might have somebody else, and they may not ever give, right, that money in the next year or two or five. So the challenge for the family, Jeff, is to find who can help them have open and honest conversations that can do that in a trusted way, who's credentialed, and can do that with an honesty and an empathy that they need, but without the edge of you need to do it with me, or you need to do it now, or you need to do it soon. And I think advisors are amazing, but they're also business people. And so the financial institutions need short-term payback. And so they aren't necessarily investing in the medium to long-term return, because the way they compensate their staff, or advisors get compensated, isn't, I'm doing the right thing for you, and in 5 or 10 years you'll prosper.
Yeah. Well,
No one's rewarded that way.
my mother has a great financial advisor, in that when I met him years and years ago, it was after a period of time where every time my parents, at the time, my dad since passed away, but every time my parents would walk in, they would be dealing with a different financial advisor. And they had been banking in the same institution for 40 years, whatever it's been, 50 years. And they just found that over a few years, they were dealing with a different financial advisor every single time. And the financial advisor that my mother still has, that she's had for a long time, the first thing he said to her when he met with her and I was there, he said, "Look, I'm not going anywhere. This is where I want to be. I
Yep.
have I have no wish to move up." He used in air quotes, "This is where I want to be. So for the next number of years, when you want to talk about your money, you have the opportunity to talk to me. So I will be around." And to his word, he's been around, and that's been very comforting for her. Let's tackle this before we let you go, Gary, because you've been so generous with your time. Aside from the wealth that the giver is leaving behind, um, how does a giver make wealth transfer as easy as possible for the recipient after the giver is gone, in terms of taxes and paperwork and red tape, thinking about land ownership or home ownership, what have you? What would be the easiest way for a giver to leave behind their wealth to the recipient?
Okay, I'm going to give you a cheeky answer
Hmm.
first. Don't have anything to leave behind, give it before.
Mm,
Okay?
yeah,
That's easiest.
yeah,
Now that's sort of practically impossible, but not entirely, right? Because the tax is dealt with at the time you gift it. Gifts aren't the same as probate and estate. So just putting it out there. So one of the ways, right, is to have less by giving it early, because all of the strife or the decisions have happened. They've happened with your input and values. They've happened with the warm hand. I love that, right? That's the right, that I think is the super ideal way, right? From a value perspective. Now, let's say that's not possible because you can't give a cottage, right? To
yeah.
like,
What
or
if
other
what if your
things.
biggest asset is your
Yeah.
home and you have no intent
Yeah.
in leaving your home?
So, you know, again, always many angles. First of all, your home, if it's your principal residence, is your kind of best tax-free savings, assuming your house will at least hold its value, appreciate. So you probably want to keep that in your name for as long as possible, because the moment it goes to someone else, it becomes taxable if it's not their principal residence. How do you deal with it? Well, you can now point to one. Hopefully, you've had the conversation with the children to say, when we're not around, here's what we'd like to see done. You would then, document that in your will accordingly, right? And then they would execute that, like a physical asset that's hard, right, to chunk out, right, is probably best done that way. But most of us don't have a lot of those. That might be the principal asset, but we don't have lots of those, right? Maybe a house, maybe a cottage, but like kind of not too much else. So when you get down from the discretionary and liquid assets down to the chunky assets that are physical, probably it comes back to the best thing is a conversation. And a lot of this has to do with family trust in the family. So if the right tax planning activity was transfer ownership early and you live in the house, right? Put it in the name of your kids, live in the house. Because maybe that's the right outcome. I'm not saying it is. You got to look at it objectively, because answering your first question, which was, well, how do we make it simpler, right? How do we make it simpler? Knowing that we'll eventually pass, knowing we'll eventually have to move assets on, right? You're going to look at that objectively. One of the chapters in my book I talk about, it's called Getting Financially Naked, and it's about someone solving a problem, and the problem solution was actually multi-generational. It was in reverse. The kids had to get involved in helping. Well, this is the same thing, right? You've got to have trust. If you trust your kids, you could put the house in their name. But if you don't trust your kids, and I don't mean that in a subversive way, right, then you need to keep your financial security your own way. So I think liquid assets are easier to deal with because you can give them sooner. I think being specific in your will to the degree that you can, absolute specificity, overlaying that specificity with conversations with the receivers so they understand what the specificity means and why it is what it is. And then lastly, maybe with physical assets like a house, you think about the most tax efficient plan. And then, I would say take that plan and put it through the filter of trust. Right.
Sage advice right from the get-go. Visit GaryTeelucksingh.com and pick up a copy of his new book, Roots of Prosperity, Building Legacies Beyond Wealth. You might even laugh out loud at one point, as I did. Gary Teelucksingh, good of you to join us. Really appreciate all the advice here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thank you so much. And I hope your audience gets just, one grain of benefit.
Absolutely. And from your personal experiences as well. Thank you, Gary. I'm Jeff Sammut. This has been another episode of Amintro Family, the podcast, which you can hear on the Amintro Family app and wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out AmintroFamily.com. And a reminder, we want to hear your stories on the forum, and we can share them here as well on Amintro Family, the podcast.